Hi, and thanks for joining me. I'm Eric Bodelson, and I want to talk to you today about process mapping uh, and what is process mapping and how I do it, which I think is different than the way that many people in the industry are doing. Um, Process mapping is simply sitting down and capturing the steps of what an employee does step by step, and in such a way that you can highlight it. And what I'm going to go over is capture the verbiage around it, um, so that then you can account for it uh, in the flowcharts that exist later on in the new software, or you can account for it in the documentation when you're providing the details and training in the new software. Process mapping is critical to the success of any digital transformation project or system migration from one system to another. And I say that because there are things that can happen in the background, and if you don't account for them, then it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. And you need to make sure when you're doing a digital transformation or s- system, whatever it is, if it's a new version of software, that it remains apples to apples if there are sub processes that aren't apparent to an end user sitting in this chair that are happening. Uh, and this by doing process mapping as your initial step, you're going to account for that in the data that you're collecting. So let me explain how I do process mapping. And I do this a little bit differently than many people that I've met in the industry. And it's meant to be thorough. It's process mapping. If you're doing a digital transformation or flipping out software, you need to account for the existing process, especially in the industry of logistics, because there might be hidden triggers that are going on behind the scenes that are sending off data to, let's say, your customer. Um, and depending on what software you're using, especially if you're going back to the days of the AS400, which are still prevalent within actually a lot of the industries. You'd be surprised at how many industries are still using green screens or mainframes. You need to be very thorough in the understanding of what a person, whoever that person is, that um, hopefully your management has put you or put me in touch with a competent person. In other words, a thorough person to explain a particular process, um, and preferably an employee that's been there a while. Um, the way I handle process is, number one, I ask that you help me find the best employee that you have anywhere in the world to explain this process, or if it's done by country, that best employee in that country to explain this process. Now, from coming from a world of logistics, there was differences in imports and exports, and air and ocean and truck. So sometimes I needed to, and I'm documenting process, I've had to go to different branches physically just to get a better understanding of this is the person I need to speak to because he really is the subject matter expert on this particular process. The way I document process to me is different than most companies because the first thing I do is I bring them into a conference room and I say, I might even probably will break out my phone, open up the voice recorder app, and say, all right, I'm starting to record. I want you to tell me what the first step is. I want them to explain it to me auditorially. What is the first thing that they do? Might say, hey, I got this piece of paper off this machine. Okay, then I need to say, okay, so you got a piece of paper off the machine. What is that piece of paper? I need the details and I need their terminology. Um, that's the information I'm trying to capture. I need that information, um, and the terminology that they're using. So when I go create documentation to replicate a process, if it's a replicatable process in the new system, uh, it needs to sound the same using that same terminology so people understand what it is we're teaching them and what it is that process is replacing from the original system. So he's going to say, I'm going to go get a piece of paper off, from here. What's that piece of paper? I'm going to ask him, what does that piece of paper look like? What is it? What is it? I might even take, well, I'm going to write this down. Here's step one. Go get a piece of paper. The piece of paper is this. Okay, great. Now I'm going to have him go through each step of the process. Uh, and I'm going to do it probably on a whiteboard or someplace where I can capture it and move the data around, because most likely he's going to forget a step. And if I'm out there with him in the field or wherever he is, and he's showing me the process, you will find it's different terminology used. It's not as much attention to terminology. And the terminology is the key, because what I have found in different industries is the lingo completely changes between company A and company B. And that lingo is critical um, in explaining what it is that they have to do when I'm referring back to what they were doing. So when I'm creating documentation, I'm going to say we step one in the new system. We're going to be doing this data entry, and I might put in brackets similar to the way that data was, or pieces of paper were picked up in the old system. And they're going to have a light bulb moment and say, "Oh, I know what that is. I understand why we're doing it that way now." Okay, and I've accounted for it. The other thing I'm paying attention to why they're doing it. And the reason I'm paying attention to why they're doing it this way is sometimes they might not know the history of why they're doing it. And when that is the case, I actually go in and do an investigation as to why they were originally doing it. Because as I mentioned, sometimes, depending on the software, there's hidden triggers that fire off things that you're not even aware of. Um, and those processes are the ones we are trying to capture and put into whatever system that we're transforming you to. Now, after I've done a really long piece of paper and I've captured everything, stop my recorder, and then I'm going to say to the end user, "Hey, all right, now you got to show me it." Now, here's where I'll probably actually break out my video recorder, grab my phone, and sit there and record them. And I'm going to also have my laptop open and say, "Okay, step one, show me that step one. Was there anything that you missed prior to that step one, or do you know that that was really like step one?" Okay, so then I'll say, "Step two is this." And I'm going to watch him do step by step by step. What I'm trying to gather is, did I miss any steps? And that's the key. The key is, did I miss any steps? And did I capture the terminology that he might be using that could be different when he's doing the process? So I'm going to notate those differences when I'm seeing it on the piece of paper that says, "Hey, this is what he said he did, and this is the terms he used," versus when he's doing it, he's like, "Yeah, I'm doing this and that and this." We have to capture that data, and we have to explain it back to the end users in training and the SOPs, um, because that's the only way they recognize what it is. If you're replacing software one for one, uh, what it is that they were doing before that differs now, and where that process that they were doing it might lie, or sometimes the process is eliminated. And sometimes I put in brackets in previous versions, or in the previous systems, they included this process and it was eliminated, because sometimes you're going to get that employee that's going to reference it back, not realizing that they're referencing it back. And if they're not following that paperwork that we're going to outline for them, then either your new employee or employees that's subject to training might pick up on, well, that's wrong. He was, in a different world. This happens. Um, or if your employee that's doing the training might actually go in and say, "Whoops, I forgot that we did get rid of that process." So the critical difference is I do this auditory processing map. What is it that you're doing? Use the terminology. And if you can capture that, you're going to have so much more success versus trying to understand what it is that they do when you're sitting with them and having them try and show you their process versus sitting with you and having them try and show you their process. So I hope you enjoyed this um, explanation, and I hope you get some value out of it. To me, it's a much more thorough process. Yes, it takes more time, but it has resulted in more details and really been a good tool because it explains what is the difference. How do we get from this piece of software to this piece of software, and how did the process change and why? And where did that step go? So your takeaways from this video really should be: if I perform this process mapping initially with an auditory description with an end user that's qualified, um, and then I go back and I watch him do it and he explains it again, you are going to find more success because you're getting the terminology, you're getting um, any any issues where I think you're gonna pick up on any issues of, well, I don't know why we do it this way, but this is the way we do it. Um, and those are the ones you have to go back and investigate. And when you ultimately finish, or now that you've accounted for everything, you're going to be able to incorporate the terminology into the documentation. You're going to be able to account for that process in the new software, in the digital transformation. And when you're going back to explain it, you can also potentially use that terminology to say, well, this is where that step went. And this is why that step wasn't needed. And what you're going to find is if you've got, Bob training the new guy, he's going to probably still reference, regardless of the software change, that original process that he was taught, because getting rid of those muscle memories and those keystrokes of what he was originally taught are really hard for the brain. So notate those changes within your documentation, and it's going to give him an aha moment. Or if he just totally um, forgets that this process was eliminated, it's going to maybe resonate with the trainee and say, wait a minute, I see this note in here that step is gone. I think documenting the original process, um, and then changing your documentations of like a year or two later to remove those word terminologies is a better practice than just trying to say, well, here's your new software, here's how we input data. Through workflow and through triggers, you in most ERPs, you need to account for that original process so that they can transition more easily and understand more thoroughly what changed when we went from the software A to software B. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something about the way I do process mapping. And I really do hope you try it, because I think you're going to see more success in the long run.